One of the hardest things for me when I was starting to write longer pieces of academic writing is that I couldn't write it all in one day. As an undergraduate, and even, don't tell anyone, as a master's student, I was really good at doing all the reading, keeping on top of things, waiting until there was an appropriate mix of adrenaline, pressure, and deadline anxiety, and getting that paper done, the night before, the morning of. And it felt good. I got good grades. The system didn't need to change. I had plenty of time to watch Battlestar Galactica. It was a great system. But somehow, in the first year or so of my PhD program, that really started to fall apart. Mostly because I wasn't used to writing sustained, complex academic prose over a long period of time. So I did what any good grad student would do, and I kept trying to write all of my papers at the last minute and got increasingly more and more frustrated with both the way that felt and the results I was getting. So I had to learn a new way. And so many people have to learn a new way in the beginning of their PhD program, or sort of they hit a wall where they have to learn to do it differently. The hardest part about that, I find, is figuring out what do you do in one day when it's not the day that you write a paper. So how do you decide how much is enough in between nothing and the whole thing in one day? So I'm going to present two different ways to kind of measure your writing progress. I have not found that one is any better than the other. I will outline when I think certain kinds work well, when I think that they fall apart, but know that the measuring is the important part, the boundary is the important part, and not so much the system that you use to measure. So let's start with our first way of measuring progress with your writing and how much is enough. And this is, I would argue, the more popular version. This is the one that is talked about more on Twitter. It's word count. So, word count has a lot of really good things going for it. It is concrete, you can't argue with it. Your computer measures it for you. It adds up very clearly to the goal. So if you know that you're trying to produce 10,000 words, it's often very clear what 100 words does towards that 10,000 word goal. Word count is really useful when you just need something concrete, when you need something that you can measure, that's unassailable, that you can't argue with it. But word count can be really, really frustrating for people who need to do more revision work. So the question that I always get when I'm working with new clients who are used to measuring their writing in word count is they'll fill out sort of a coaching log for me, and they'll say, it was a great day. I spent all day revising. I feel so much better about this section, but I only got 200 words out of the whole week. What a wasted week. I only got 200 words. And the coach in me is like, wait, you got the whole section figured out. You've got so much better understanding of what you're doing and where you're going. Who cares that it was only 200 words? The 200 words that you added are so important. So, word count is useful in the beginning. I find it's often really, really good in the early drafting stages when you say, okay, I got 500 words of that new draft in today or this week. That's great. It can be really motivating to stack that up. I find that it's less helpful in the later stages, revision, revising, adding citations, tweaking arguments, going back to the reading, going back to the research, redoing tables. In those later stages, it can feel really demoralizing to be like, oh, well, my word count total only changed 50 words this week and I lost them. What a terrible feeling. It is a terrible feeling. So thinking about what you're emphasizing in the writing process when you're so insistent on measuring word count alone. Many academic writers don't talk about the extensive amount of revision that they do. Sometimes it's prompted by reviewers, sometimes it's prompted by feedback from a writing group, sometimes it's just self-revision, but no one likes to go on Twitter and brag about the fact that they redid their methods section for the 18th time today. But revision is a really important part of writing complex, dense prose. You have to work at it a little bit to make sure that what you mean to say is matching up with what's on the page. So, word count, to summarize, Great for early stages of writing when you're really flying through those new drafts. Great when you need something concrete. Awesome for people who are numerically motivated, but can be less helpful in some of the more organic back and forth later stages of writing, like revision. So the other main system of measuring your writing progress is to think about it in terms of time. Now, time is so tricky because what is an hour for me might look totally different than an hour for you. What I can get done in an hour is different than what I on Tuesday can get done for an hour. So it's not even the best um, mode of measurement. It's definitely not a great mode of comparison between people, but it is useful in terms of quantifying a commitment to a project without necessarily having to tie it to a to-do list item or a word count. So I love the idea of setting a POM goal for the day or even for the week. Say that you want to write 5 POMs over the next 2 days. Whether you do 4 on one day or 1 on the other, it doesn't really matter because you just, 5 out of 5 is pretty clear. And where you spend those POMs is also up to you and up to the project, really. So where does the project want you to focus? What would be the most useful way to spend those 5 POMs? If you're not focused on word count and you are focused on time tracking, then it's a little bit easier to pivot between different areas of the writing process because they're all getting counted. So I love tracking time when you're in kind of the organic phases of it. I love it if you're in a place where you have a really stable but busy schedule and you're trying to get your 1 or 2 POMs a day and on your dissertation. A POM, for anybody who might not be familiar, is a short for Pomodoro. It's a 25-minute work session. I use the word POM pretty liberally. So sometimes I will work in 25-minute POMs with a 5-minute break afterwards. Sometimes I work in 50-minute POMs with a 10-minute break after. And sometimes I work in 15-minute or even 10-minute POMs if my brain is pretty distracted and smaller chunks are feeling better. But measuring time can be a really useful way to give yourself credit for showing up, even if the progress doesn't look as linear on paper. Some of the places that it can fall apart, though, if you're not careful, is if you aren't being as reflective as you could be about where that time is going. So if you set the timer for an hour to do your hour of dissertation work and you spend it rewriting the same sentence over and over again, for some people that can be really helpful. For other people, it's a sign that you might be stuck, you might not know what to do next, you might be blocked by something, and rather than reaching out or trying to kind of resolve that, you stay sort of iterating in place on that one task. So some people have more insight into their own writing process. Some people don't. It's definitely not a skill that all of us are born with. I know that when I first started writing my dissertation, I had to build some self-awareness about where my time was going because I would sit down for the day, I would start with a couple of emails just to get them out of the way, and then poof, all of my writing time was gone, and not 1 second was spent on the actual dissertation. So knowing that time is a really good thing to track, but it also requires a different level of self-reflection in terms of what you spent that time on and whether or not it was moving you forward in the way that you wanted it to. But word count and time are both really useful ways to kind of measure your progress. I find, though, that the most important part, whether you're using word count or sort of time to track your work sessions, is to let yourself believe and really internalize the idea that the work session is one of many and that it will end. So it is really hard if you're used to um, stopping at a natural stopping point to finish up a work session just because a um, just because the timer went off or just because you reached your word count for the day. But to shift from I write my paper all in one go, I do it, I start it, I finish it, it's done, the kind of, the previous model, into writing as a practice. I did my part for the day, I wrapped it up, I set up for the next session. It can feel really unsatisfying if you're used to setting up if you're used to getting a whole thing ready, done, and checked off your list. It can be unsatisfying to say, oh, well, today I wrote a paragraph in a dissertation that will one day have potentially 1 million paragraphs. That is nothing. I will never finish. It's very easy to kind of fall down that doom trail. So, getting in the habit of tracking your progress, knowing that it adds up, seeing, having some data that you can prove to yourself. You know that today I did 100 words, but over the course of this week, I did 500 words. That's this many new pages. That's this much of a chapter. Progress is real. I can see it. There it is. I can start to believe it. It's definitely a switch. So if this is something that you're struggling with, I really encourage you to let yourself off the hook a little bit. This is a skill. It takes some time to practice, and it really does look different for each individual person, and it might even look different at different phases of your own writing process. So measure in the way that makes you feel like it is the best representation of what you did that day, and keep your eye on the data, because the data will help you figure out what's working so you can do more of that and what needs a little bit more support. So thank you so much, and good luck measuring all of that writing process.